Indonesia as a nation is always so dependent on the government to fulfill its demands. And I've been looking at the whole ecosystem of political discourse on the internet, and Indonesia's political discourse is actually quite interesting. It's unlike most of the countries around the world, and let me share with you what I've learned. The Indonesian political debate is not a debate between the left wing and the right wing. The Indonesian debate primarily revolves around authoritarianism or libertarianism, but let's first answer the question of what Indonesia actually stands for. The whole issue of what Indonesia is supposed to stand for is already set in stone in its constitution, actually. Indonesia's 1945 constitution is more left-leaning economically, especially regarding natural resources and social welfare, with passages like Article 33 about natural resources and its management, Article 27 about the right to work and livelihood, Article 28 about social rights, Article 31 about the right to education, Article 34 about social welfare and vulnerable groups. These provisions entrench state responsibility in welfare, employment, education, and protection of vulnerable citizens. Collectively, these articles push Indonesia towards a left-leaning, welfare-oriented model, even within a mixed economy. And this wasn't random. Sukarno and his peers drafted these provisions in 1945 as a safeguard against neo-colonial capitalism or market globalization that Sukarno so feared. So surprise, surprise, the Constitution suggests that we are a socialist country, or at the bare minimum, a social democratic country. But left comms don't take this as a win yet. This is why the Indonesian government is so big and centralizes so much power, and at the same time, many people rely on the government for welfare and livelihood. And for instance, Indonesia has 49 ministries operating in the government, which compared to China's 26 ministries and the United States' 15 departments is a humongous number. And this can be abused by the government, who can form new ministries by invoking one of the articles for welfare and grant the ministry to a political appointee. With a constitution like this, Indonesia, by and in large, is designed to allow the government to intervene in many fields and sectors using the excuse of protecting people's rights, welfare, and also security. So technically, state monopoly of oil distribution, like what Minister of Energy Bahlil and state-owned Pertamina company are doing, is actually okay by principle, even though a lot of us are unhappy with the whole arrangement. Looking at you, Mr. Bahlil, you're not beating the robbing goblin accusations, sir. And many people in Indonesia, surprisingly, are okay with this arrangement. If you take the way Indonesia does its government over in Europe and America, bro, that shit will not fly at all. In an American definition, our country's practicing what they would call tyranny. And Indonesians are generally more communitarian and collectivist, which is rooted inside our culture of gotong royong, which makes a big state less threatening compared to the West, where big government equals tyranny. But again, like, Indonesians don't really find anything wrong with it, because a large portion of Indonesians still rely on the government. So let's talk some data. According to a data made by the World Bank in 2023, Indonesia's social protection system covers approximately 56.3% of the total population, with the poorest quintile having a higher coverage rate of 66.6%. Let's take a look at the Indonesians. Around 9.7% of Indonesia's population, which is 26 million people, live below poverty lines, while a rough estimate of 20 to 25% of Indonesians, that's 55 to 69 million people, nice, are poor or low income enough to rely on government programs for essentials like food and healthcare. And inequality is a real issue in Indonesia, with much of the Dutch developing only Sumatra and Java Islands during the colonial days. The constitution and government of Indonesia is set up, centralized to micromanage the distribution of goods and development and build up regions that lack development, which to this day in 80 years of our history is still pretty underdeveloped. Here's the paradox. Indonesia's constitution is socialist by design, but the world it operates in is capitalist. So while Indonesians expect subsidies and protection, we also chase foreign direct investment and global competitiveness. We reject privatization in principle, but somehow we tolerate oligarchic monopolies in practice, all 9 of them actually. Now that paradox leads us back to the main premise. Rather than left and right, most Indonesians agree that Indonesia is placed on the left wing of the spectrum. But the issue isn't about how leftist we are. The issue is how we execute those leftist ideas, which brings us to the topic of authoritarianism versus libertarianism. So it's more of a technical issue than a principle of one, as I've recently learned. Let's see how this plays out in the Indonesian free meals program that Prabowo has made. The authoritarian position that favors the government to play a huge role believes that the central government should design and fund and enforce the program nationwide. Authoritarians believe that a strong state hand equals faster rollouts and less reliance on messy local or private actors that could be untrustworthy or risk the program with bad quality food. Prabowo and his administration favors this one, funneling the largest state budget to the National Nutrition Bureau and pushing the Bureau to manage the rollouts nationwide. Meanwhile, the libertarian position argues that local governments, schools, and even community groups should decide on how to provide free meals. Libertarians argue that too much central government involvement might invite corruption, inefficiency, and a uniform one-size-fits-all policy that doesn't necessarily meet the requirements of different regions. Many parents and schools and even political influencers prefer decentralization and better targeting, as well as more oversight on the rollouts. Both sides of the argument agree on the principle that children deserve free meals. This eases the burden on the parents' finance by at least providing lunch to school children and giving the government control over the children's nutritional intake, which is believed to be one of the core issues of slow human development in Indonesia. However, the disagreement comes from who delivers the program and how much power the central government should have. In the US, the right might reject free lunches outright because inside the American definition, having your tax money pay for someone else's lunch that is not the military equates to socialism. And fortunately, Indonesia does not argue principles. Indonesians argue how to get the job done. In America, this would be a fight over whether the state should feed kids at all. In Indonesia, everyone agrees kids deserves free meals. The only fight is over who and how the rice box gets served. The authoritarians would push the ministries to run it despite bloating, while libertarians push for giving the budget to schools or districts and distrust mega ministries. If you look at Indonesian social media, there is no political influencer out there who argues against this program on its principles. Most Indonesian political influencers support the spirit behind the program, but they always criticize the execution. And looking at the recent results behind the rollouts of the free meals program, where data show that around 5,000 school children across Indonesia are poisoned by the food, plus there is a difference in the quality of the meals from one province to another, the libertarians might have a point here to argue against government inefficiency. In Indonesia, the debate is always about who can do the job better, never about whether this is right or wrong. But if you look at Indonesia from the outsider perspective, it's actually quite strange. We're not arguing whether welfare programs should exist, that's taken for granted. The argument is always about execution, about centralization versus decentralization. To an American or European observer, this is almost unthinkable. Imagine politicians in the US fighting about whether or not free school meals are socialist, but only about who delivers them. It's unthinkable. So why does this matter for us? Because if our politics never debates principles, only technique, then we risk becoming blind to other alternatives. We accept the Constitution as destiny, but we rarely ask, is this the only way to secure welfare? Is a bigger state always better? Or could empowering families, communities, and schools deliver more dignity and less dependence? But here's another angle Indonesians rarely think about. What if the state didn't feed kids directly at all? What if instead the government gave families the resources, vouchers, subsidies, or tax relief, and let parents decide what their children need? That would still meet the constitutional duty of welfare, but it would cut the bloated ministries out of the kitchen and empower families and push competition among local providers to raise quality. In short, a solution that's more market-friendly but still child-friendly. What's striking to me is that these angles in Indonesia, like giving families food vouchers, letting markets compete, or trusting parents with financial choices, I mean, I can understand why the government doesn't trust parents with financial choices. They can't even make the decision to, have kids or not, are almost never debated in Indonesian social media. And the reason is actually quite simple. Both the state and the public in Indonesia has very little understanding of how markets actually work. We don't talk about capitalism, financial practice, or even financial liberty in serious terms in politics and even in the classrooms. For most Indonesians, the government is the only lens through which welfare can be imagined. So the debate never leaves the narrow corridor of Jakarta runs it versus local government runs it, while the possibility of market-based or family-driven solutions is just ignored completely. But ultimately, the free meals program reveals something very insightful to me. It reveals the Indonesian paradox. This is Indonesia's true political spectrum. Constitutionally, we're all left-wing, but the real fight is about how welfare is delivered and how much the central government holds. Indonesia doesn't understand left versus right. Our entire politics lives in a narrow corridor. Authoritarian versus libertarian. We're blind to other market alternatives or different core principles because both the state and the public can't imagine welfare without government control. If you care about this, don't just accept the frame of Jakarta versus daerah. Ask your leaders, why can't families have more say? Why can't schools manage their own budget? Why is the market always left out of the conversation? So, what should we do next? First, realize that Indonesia's debate isn't left versus right, it's authoritarian versus libertarian. And second, don't get trapped in that narrow corridor. Start asking the harder questions. Why don't we talk about financial liberty? Why can't families choose? Why are ministries the only solution we ever imagine? If we don't expand the debate, the paradox will just keep repeating itself. Yes, so ask yourselves, do children really deserve free meals? Yes, so ask yourself, is state intervention the only way that we can live? Good thing we have Purbaya inside the cabinet now. That guy's a capitalist unit. If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like and subscribe and leave a comment down below to tell me what you think, and I'll see you in the next episode.